On the 3rd of September 1978, the Hunyani, a Rhodesian civilian Viscount aircraft, made a routine stop at Kariba, midway between Victoria Falls and Salisbury, today's Harare. For the 4 crew and 52 passengers aboard, nothing seemed particularly out of the ordinary. However, when the aircraft took off from Kariba, disaster struck. Just 5 minutes after takeoff, the aircraft's wing was hit by a missile, forcing a crash landing. Thanks to the skill of the crew, 18 men and women survived the initial crash. Sadly, the survivors were not met by emergency forces, but rather the very men who had attacked the aircraft. These men, rifles in hand, corralled 10 survivors into a group and opened fire. That day, 48 of the 56 people on the Hunyani would breathe their last breath. News of this massacre was met with national outrage, a righteous indignation towards the perpetrators of the Hunyani attack. The question of who exactly had orchestrated the attack was answered by the statement of Joshua Nkomo. He confirmed that ZIPRA, the military wing of his ZAPU party, had shot down the Viscount with a Soviet-supplied Strela rocket launcher. This revelation was all the more strange considering that ZAPU and the Rhodesian government had been in secret alliance talks just days before the Hunyani massacre. Now, by acknowledging ZIPRA's role in the attack, Nkomo had shattered any prospects of alliance. Further, he had challenged Rhodesia's capacity for self-defense by exposing their failure to secure their northern frontier. Ever since the withdrawal of Portugal from Mozambique, Rhodesia had been forced to dedicate the majority of its military resources to the Mozambican frontier. However, while ZANU migrated its forces to Mozambique, ZAPU had only strengthened its military presence within Zambia. ZAPU, like ZANU, was a revolutionary communist movement which aimed to overthrow the white minority government of Rhodesia. The similarities, however, ended there. ZAPU drew its support primarily from the Indabella and was nominally Marxist-Leninist. Internationally, ZAPU was backed by the Soviet Union and closely aligned communist states, notably Cuba. While it is true that Mugabe's ZANU eventually triumphed in the struggle for control, we should not underestimate ZAPU's strength. Training from Cuban and Russian advisors made ZIPRA a force to be reckoned with, one respected by their Rhodesian foe. In order to avenge the Hunyadi passengers and restore faith in its military capacity, Rhodesia would need to strike ZIPRA quickly and decisively. With this objective in mind, Rhodesian intelligence identified 3 potential ZIPRA targets within Zambia. Freedom Camp, located just outside of the Zambian capital, served as Joshua Nkomo's headquarters and a major mustering point for guerrillas entering Rhodesia. Rhodesian intelligence estimated that Freedom Camp held over 4,500 personnel in total, including Zambian police as well as Russian and Cuban military advisors. To the east of Freedom Camp, the Rhodesians identified 4 interconnected guerrilla camps, codenamed the Central Guerrilla Training Complexes, or CGT for short. With an estimated 11,000 personnel across 30 square kilometers, these complexes housed the majority of ZIPRA's armed forces. To the north of Freedom Camp and CGT Complexes was Mkushi Camp. The smallest of the 3 camps, Mkushi housed as many as 1,900 guerrillas. The camp housed 2 complexes, housing trained guerrillas and those still in training, respectively. In a joint force operation, codenamed Operation Gatling, Rhodesian forces would strike all 3 ZIPRA targets in an 8-hour window. Although the short window of attack would partition Rhodesia's meager military resources, it was felt necessary owing to the shortcomings of Operation Dingo. That operation, which I covered previously, involved a 40-hour window between attacks on the first and second targets. Consequently, ZANLA was able to evacuate most of its personnel prior to the second phase of Dingo. The lessons learned in Mozambique would not be forgotten in Zambia. Since the targets were located within Zambian territory, the Rhodesians would also run the risk of a possible Zambian response. The Zambian Defense Force, headquartered in the capital Lusaka, were just a stone's throw from Freedom Camp. In theory, Zambian MiGs could intercept an attack upon Freedom Camp in just 10 minutes. Therefore, any attack upon Freedom Camp would require exceptional speed and precision, lest it incur Zambian intervention. On October 19th, 6 weeks after the Hunyadi was shot down, Operation Gatling would commence. At 8:30 a.m., the Rhodesians would begin an air assault upon the Freedom Camp. It was hoped that the element of surprise would allow the Rhodesians to eliminate important ZAPU and ZIPRA figures, notably Nkomo. At 11:45, the second phase of the operation would begin at Mkushi. While the base was attacked from the air, paratroopers and helitroopers of the SAS would envelop the base. Finally, the assault upon CGT Complexes would commence at 3 p.m. Rhodesia's RLI would envelop the largest of the 4 complexes, codenamed CGT-2, while air support would be relied upon to shatter the remaining 3 complexes. The morning of October 19th was clear, albeit miserably hot. That morning, 4 Canberra bombers were carefully prepared for an attack upon Freedom Camp. Each aircraft carried 300 Alpha bombs, imprecise but devastating over a wide area. At the time of Operation Gatling, these 4 Canberras represented the entirety of Rhodesia's bomber fleet. However, what the Rhodesian Air Force lacked in numbers was made up for in experience. The Canberra pilots, Green Section, had proven their mettle in countless prior engagements, notably Dingo. Green Section took off at 7:45 a.m. in groups of 2. Simultaneously, at Mana Pools, 4 K-Car gunships took flight from Freedom Camp. They would arrive approximately 3 minutes after the strike by Green Squadron. That same morning, at Field Air Force Base, the Rhodesian hunters prepared to lift off. The 2 aircraft of Red Section lifted off first, carrying 68mm rockets. At 7:45 a.m., they were followed by the 4 aircraft of Blue Section, which each carried 2 large bombs. Finally, at 8 a.m., the 2 hunters of White Section took off, incendiary bombs in tow. Everything was set. At the ZIPRA base of Freedom Camp, October 19th was a bustle. Rumors of a visit from Nkomo had spread throughout the camp. The men were up early and unusually eager that special day. Nevertheless, the common ZIPRA guerrilla was a league ahead of his ZANLA approximate. Freedom Camp's parade ground presented rows of well-kept guerrillas opposed to the relative disorder of the camps attacked during Operations Dingo and Eland. As the guerrillas stood erect, waiting for Nkomo, they remained oblivious to the far more perilous surprise that awaited them. At 8:30 a.m., the 4 hunters of Blue Section dived towards the Freedom Camp. The guerrillas stood helpless as precision bombs detonated amidst their ranks. Norris Danga, a ZIPRA guerrilla present, later stated that the bombs came like lightning, spreading chaos throughout the camp. Unbeknownst to the guerrillas of Freedom Camp, Blue Section was only the opening act. Their strike had focused upon destroying communication infrastructure and marking the way for Green Section. The timing of Green Section was impeccable. Moments after the last hunter of Blue Section dropped its ordnance, 4 low-flying Canberras were seen in the distance. Covering a wide swath of the camp, the bombers dropped a combined 1,200 alpha bombs. The ZIPRA guerrillas, mostly unable to flee the parade grounds, became sitting ducks, their fine training irrelevant in the hail of shrapnel. As the carpet bombing carried on, Blue Section repositioned for one further strike upon Freedom Camp. Switching to their 30mm cannons, Blue Section unleashed a devastating volley upon the trenches and anti-aircraft installments which surrounded the camp. Mopping up Freedom Camp's defenses, Blue Section's cannon fire made way for the next phase of the attack on Freedom Camp. Just 3 minutes after Green Section's carpet bombing, 4 K-cars entered above Freedom Camp. The gunships, in turn, released devastating fire upon the disordered guerrillas of Freedom Camp. Freedom Camp's anti-aircraft installments, many of which later proved to be dummies, offered the gunships no resistance. It was at this time that Chris Dixon made contact with Lusaka Airport. His exchange would be immortalized in popular media, forever earning him the moniker Green Leader.
Tower, this is Green Leader. This is a message for the station commander at Mumba from the Rhodesian Air Force. We are attacking the terrorist base at Westlands Farm at this time. This attack is against Rhodesian dissidents and not against Zambia. Rhodesia has no quarrel, repeat, no quarrel with Zambia or her security forces. We therefore ask you not to intervene or oppose our attack. However, we are orbiting your airfield at this time and are under orders to shoot down any Zambian Air Force aircraft which does not comply with this request and attempts to take off. Did you copy all that? Copied. Roger, thanks. Cheers.
As the gunships retreated, the hunters of White and Red sections raced to finish off Freedom Camp. The 2 hunters of White section hit Freedom Camp's headquarters and communications center with incendiary bombs. The last Rhodesian strike would come from Red section. The hunters of Red section had been tasked with circling Zambia's Mumbwa airport in case the Zambians chose to respond to Rhodesia's attack upon ZIPRA. When it became clear Zambia would take no part in the operations, Red section raced towards Freedom Camp. Without prior planning, the hunters of Red section chose their targets sporadically, striking anything left unscathed by the previous strikes. In the time most of us would take for a smoke break, the Rhodesians had completely devastated ZIPRA's military headquarters. The second phase of Rhodesia's attack would strike Mkushi Camp. 160 kilometers north of Lusaka, Mkushi was far from any major Zambian military assets. The camp's location gave the Rhodesians free rein to engage ground troops in a larger window of attack than at Freedom Camp. The attack would involve Canberra bombers, vampires, hunters, K-cars, lynxes, paratroopers, and heli-troopers. Although Mkushi was nearly as far from Rhodesia's closest airbase as it was from Lusaka, the Rhodesians were prepared to deal with that logistical hurdle. On an isolated hilltop near Mkushi, the Rhodesians had airdropped the necessary supplies to refuel and resupply the attacking forces. The rapid turnaround of the Rhodesian Air Force ensured that word of the devastation at Freedom Camp had not yet reached the guerrillas stationed at Mkushi. Most of the unsuspecting guerrillas were taking their lunch break. Some were taking shelter to avoid the beating sun, and only a select few were in any condition to fend off an imminent enemy attack. Out of nowhere, the 4 Canberras barreled towards the camp. The bombers flew in 2 formations, targeting the northern and southern facilities of the camp. The south, where most of the guerrillas were stationed, was dealt a devastating carpet bombing by Green Section. However, in the north, the 2nd formation flew too far to the north. Only one of the bombers was able to unleash its payload upon the northern facilities. Immediately after Green Section's attack, the 4 hunters of Blue Section entered the fray. They unleashed 8 precision golf bombs upon both the north and south camps. In the chaos unleashed by the airstrikes, 6 aging Dakotas flew towards the camp. Their payload, 120 battle-hardened men of the SAS, were dropped onto the western and northern flanks of the premises. Unfortunately for the Rhodesians, the SAS paratroopers on the western flank were dropped too closely to Mkushi, allowing a lucky few guerrillas to escape under the still airborne paratroopers. A 3rd Rhodesian blunder occurred when the 59 helitroopers were dropped on the camp's eastern flank. The unremarkable terrain led the helicopters to drop their payload at the wrong river, 5 kilometers away from the camp. As the helitroopers waited to be picked up and delivered to the eastern flank, many guerrillas were able to flee to the east. Even with this blunder, the Mkushi camp remained in a state of chaos and disorder. Many guerrillas were oblivious to the nature of the attack, unwilling or unable to put up resistance. Only in the west were enough seasoned guerrillas concentrated to put up a serious resistance. Here, the Rhodesians incurred their first fatality as a female ZIPRA guerrilla killed Rhodesian Lance Corporal Jeff Tholet. Before the western resistance was cleared, another Rhodesian was badly wounded on the chin. To the north and east, the paratroopers and helitroopers landed uncontested. After the strikes by Green Section and Blue Section, waves of Vampires, K-Cars, and Lynxes maintained aerial pressure upon the remaining guerrillas. Those guerrillas who did not seek refuge in foxholes or the marshlands to the camp south were mowed down by the Rhodesian Air Force. Rhodesian air power ensured that the northern and eastern flanks could continue forward without significant resistance. Their job now consisted of clearing foxholes and eliminating any living guerrillas, slowly advancing upon the enemy camp. Gradually, the SAS made their way to the center of Mkushi camp. As the Rhodesian Air Force left to prepare for the final target, the SAS was left to collect or destroy munitions and mop up any further resistance. In the battle for Mkushi, the Rhodesians had suffered 2 casualties, including 1 fatality. Of the 1900 ZIPRA guerrillas, at least 400 had lost their lives. Although the attack had been a clear success, the mistakes made by the Western Dakotas and Eastern G-Cars gave the guerrillas a window of opportunity to escape. With the first 2 targets neutralized, the Rhodesians set their eyes upon the central guerrilla training camps. Of the 4 major complexes, 3 would be attacked only from the air, while the central complex, CGT-2, would be enveloped by the RLI. Rhodesia planned to commence attacks upon the targets at precisely 3 p.m. That plan would have to be amended. The narrow window between the attacks on Mkushi and the CGT camps proved unrealistic. In order to ensure the plan continued smoothly, the decision was made to move back the final phase by 15 minutes. At 3:15 p.m., the Rhodesian bombers and hunter aircraft approached CGT-2. Like clockwork, the hunters swooped in, dropping precision bombs, followed by the carpet bombing conducted by the Rhodesian bombers. Simultaneously, 2 hunters and 3 vampires emerged over the other CGT complexes, unleashing devastating payloads. Everything was going perfectly. Too perfectly. As the K-cars swooped in to mop up any retreating guerrillas, they found themselves bereft of targets. Upon landing, the 120 RLI confirmed what the Rhodesians now feared. The central training complex was nearly abandoned. Each of the 4 compounds, which had once housed a combined 11,000 guerrillas, were now nearly empty. The only signs of life came when the enemy anti-aircraft emplacements began to open fire. Although these emplacements were quickly eliminated, they managed to land a critical hit on one of the Rhodesian K-cars before their demise. While the helicopter's crew survived the crash, the helicopter itself was destroyed. As the Rhodesian aircraft withdrew from the now abandoned complexes, they left the RLI there to fend for themselves. For the next 2 days, the Rhodesians gradually ferried men and supplies from Zambia back to Rhodesia. For the resource-starved Rhodesians, nearly every piece of abandoned enemy equipment could serve a purpose. The 20th and 21st of October were, for the most part, quiet. The only major activity occurred when SAS at Mkushi encountered a band of Zambian soldiers headed in their direction. After meeting these soldiers in an ambush, the SAS quickly routed the band, killing 37 and taking a Zambian and high-ranking ZIPRA guerrilla as prisoners. The operation officially ended when the last RLI soldiers were ferried back to Rhodesia in G-cars. In its aftermath, Operation Gatling served to restore the morale of the Rhodesian nation. For ZIPRA, the operation served to achieve the opposite, representing a severe blow to the organization of and general confidence within ZIPRA. Nkomo would characterize the operation as a mass killing of refugees and vowed to end all talks with the Rhodesian government. Logistically, Operation Gatling represented one of the most impressive operations in Rhodesian history. It should not have been possible to perform 3 major attacks in one day with the resources Rhodesia had available. Rhodesia was able to strike a decisive blow against ZIPRA, inflicting as many as 3,000 casualties and 1,500 fatalities, counting all 3 targets. Rhodesia suffered comparatively less, with 4 casualties, including 1 fatality. In terms of equipment, a few Rhodesian aircraft sustained damage and 1 K-car gunship was lost. In the days after Operation Gatling, it became clear that Nkomo had been tipped off to the operation. However, some ambiguity exists in who passed the intelligence to Nkomo and what exactly he was told. If Nkomo knew of the operation, why weren't Mkushi and Freedom Camp abandoned? And even if Freedom Camp could not be abandoned in time after the tip-off, why were the ZIPRA guerrillas completely unprepared? If you have answers to any of these questions, please post them in the comments section below. Thank you for watching my documentary. If you enjoyed it, please comment, subscribe, like, anything to help the algorithm. I appreciate all of you who watch my videos, and I'll try to answer as many comments as possible. Thank you.